From Earthseed, The Books of the Living by Lauren Oya Olamina. Here we are. Energy, mass, life, shaping life, mind, shaping mind, God, shaping God. Consider, we are born not with purpose, but with potential. They'll make a god of her. I think that would please her, if she could know about it. In spite of all her protests and denials, she's always needed devoted, obedient followers, disciples, who would listen to her and believe everything she told them. And she needed large events to manipulate. All gods seem to need these things. Her legal name was Lauren Oya Olamina Bankole. To those who loved her or hated her, she was simply Olamina. She was my biological mother. She is dead.
Octavia Butler, greatest of all time, the absolute GOAT. No one's matching her. Let's fucking go.
Yeah, let's make a god of her.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf. Our second ever episode. What was it on? It was on Parable of the Sower.
Way back in the day. Wow.
A year ago, we did an episode on Bloodchild, another Octavia Butler. And we are now with our third now annual Octavia Butler. We are doing Parable of the Talents. And I've got to say that the sequel to Parable of the Sower, and I got to say Parable of the Sower starts in 2025. So there's something that's very like circular about this. So 2032, we're going to have to, I don't know, come up with the plot of Parable of the Trickster and then talk about it.
Yeah, Parable the Trickster, and there was like six more supposed to be after these, weren't there?
There were different talks. Parable of the Trickster is, I know, the like confirmed one she worked on, and then was just like, there, I don't have anything. The story of Lauren Olamina is certainly closed out in this book, though.
I wonder, like, you would know more about Butler's process than I, but it feels like it feels like a natural ending point for a duology, but there's all kinds of stuff from 2032 to like the 2080s, 2090s that could definitely be filled in. And I wonder, like, do you write this having a sense that you might not have more time? Do you write this wondering if you just might run up against writer's block
Well,
and
she wasn't particularly old when she died, it's worth noting.
right.
I also worth noting Parable of the Trickster was supposed to take place on the spaceship. It was not going to feature Lauren Olamina as a living character.
Mm.
So I don't even know what that would have looked like, who the voice is. Is it the daughter? Has she changed her mind? I don't know.
Ideally, it's not Anyara.
We'll see. What I do know, yeah, right. What I do know, this book is fucking goated. Parable of the Sower, of course, 1993. Absolutely did not have to look that up and re-record that. That was something I knew off the dome.
A lot
This
of cool
book,
shit happened in 1993.
oh yeah, oh yeah. Weren't you born in 1993?
Yes, I was.
Hell yeah, there you go. Along with Parable of the Sower, you were sown that and reaped.
Well, no, I was sown in 1992, but
I suppose that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You were reaped. Um, you were parabled. This Parable of Talents is not until 1998. She had to take a little bit of time uh in between these books. This
isn't
is a
that the year
really
you were born?
1997 was the year I was born.
Ah,
So
okay.
just before. I wanted to be out just in time to read it. Just to catch the book, you know.
Yeah, you
Um,
started young.
we're not going to recap the entire plot of Parable of the Sower. We're also not going to do the Octavia Butler bio. We have a full discussion of Parable of the Sower under our belts. I'll warn you, the audio quality is not as good. We are not as good at podcasting, but it does exist if you scroll back in our feed. I am going to give you a quick biography of Octavia Butler that is written at the end of this book just to ground you. Though, again, full analysis in that episode. Apologies for us not knowing what we were fucking doing 2 years ago.
2 years and a whole gender ago.
And a whole gender ago, yes. Octavia E. Butler, 1947 to 2006, was a best-selling and award-winning author, considered one of the best science fiction writers of her generation. She received both the Hugo and Nebula Awards, and in 1995 became the first author of science fiction to receive a MacArthur Fellowship. She was also awarded the prestigious PEN Lifetime Achievement Award in 2000. Butler's father died when she was very young. Her mother raised her in Pasadena, California. Shy, tall, and dyslexic, Butler immersed herself in reading whatever books she could find. She began writing at 12 when a B movie called Devil Girl from Mars inspired her to try writing a better science fiction story. She took writing classes throughout college, attended the Clarion Writers Workshop, and in 1969, the Open Door Workshop of the Screenwriters Guild of America, a program designed to mentor Latino and African American writers. There, she met renowned science fiction author Harlan Ellison, who adopted Butler as his protege. In 1974, she began writing Pattern Master, which came out in 1976, set in a future world where a network of all-powerful telepaths dominate humanity. Praised both for its imaginative vision and for Butler's powerful prose, the novel spawned 4 prequels, beginning with Mind of My Mind, 77, and finishing with Clay's Ark in 1984. Although the Patternist series established Butler among science fiction elite, Kindred, 79, brought her mainstream success. In that novel, a young black woman travels back in time to the antebellum South, where she is called on to protect the life of a white slaveholding ancestor. Kindred's protagonist stood out in the genre at that time that was widely dominated by white men. In 1985, Butler won Nebula and Hugo Awards for the novella Bloodchild, which was reprinted in 1995 as Bloodchild and Other Stories. Dawn, 1987, became the Xenogenesis trilogy about a race of aliens who visit Earth to save humanity from itself. Adulthood writes in 1988, and Imago, 1989, continued the story, following the life of the first child born with a mixture of alien and human DNA. Fledgling, 2005, which combines vampire and science fiction narratives, was Butler's final novel. She wasn't writing romance or feel-good novels, mystery author Walter Mosley said. She was writing very difficult, brilliant work. Her books have been translated into several languages and continue to appear widely in school and college literature curricula. Butler died at home in Washington in 2006.
God, Harlan Ellison. What a connection that is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think Walter Mosley nailed it. Yeah, this is difficult, brilliant work. Certainly not feel good, though there are moments that really feel good, which I think is necessary in almost any work that's going to be hard. Is
More,
that
more
honesty.
optimism than we've seen in Ellison, at least on the show.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we only have a very small section of Ellison, but
We could also we could spin off a sub-series on like vampire fiction written by people who don't ordinarily write vampire fiction. You remember that I mentioned that S.M. Sterling did a vampire book?
true. But then I'd have to talk about S.M. Sterling again. Um, yeah. But Peril of the Sower was this book about Lauren Olamina. As we know, she is a young girl who, Afro-Latina, very tall, gangly, son of a Southern Baptist minister. There's a lot of the actual
Parallels.
Butler in her, and she has this disorder that she's a sharer. She can feel the pain and pleasure of other people. It's kind of got a pseudoscientific explanation for it. Whatever. It's not supposed to be hyper realistic. Most of the stuff happening here is pretty realistic, pretty grounded in real technology with some occasional side stuff. I will say, Sower though, there is a jump from that to Parable of the Talents and some more sci-fi shit that's not in Sower. But basically, she founds this concept of a religion that says God has changed. Lenore read from the Books of the Living at the top. It's, we joke about it being like a religion based on dialectics, but that's not entirely wrong. Um, not entirely, but there is definitely an element of that. And at the end of Parable of the Sower, she founds a community called Acorn, which she intends to be sort of the beginning of a new world in this crumbling dystopian United States. And this book picks up 5 years after the events of that book in the early 2030s. And while the economy is recovering somewhat, shit is still really bad. And despite things actually getting somewhat better, the politics are getting worse.
Yeah. It puts me in mind of because again, there's so many things that Butler nails.
Yeah.
that are like rather uncanny.
Make America Great Again is the slogan of the presidential candidate in this.
Yeah, well, and literally, like within living memory, very recently within living memory, at the time the book was written, of course, we know that that was Ronald Reagan's campaign slogan in
Was Make
1980.
America Great. Yeah.
Yeah, every bit the dog whistle then that it was now, of
100%.
course, of course. Um, and it puts me in mind of how people might talk about the epoch we're living through now. If I can read the first couple of paragraphs here in chapter one.
Please.
Uh, I have read that the period of upheaval that journalists have begun to refer to as the apocalypse, or more commonly, more bitterly, the pox, lasted from 2015 through 2030, a decade and a half of chaos. This is untrue. The pox has been a much longer torment. It began well before 2015, perhaps even before the turn of the millennium. It has not ended. I have also read that the pox was caused by accidentally coinciding climatic, economic, and sociological crises. It would be more honest to say that the pox was caused by our own refusal to deal with obvious problems in those areas. We caused the problems, then we sat and watched as they grew into crises. I have heard people deny this, but I was born in 1970. I have seen enough to know that it is true. I have watched education become more a privilege of the rich than the basic necessity that it must be if civilized society is to survive. I have watched as convenience, profit, and inertia excused greater and more dangerous environmental degradation. I have watched poverty, hunger, and disease become inevitable for more and more people. She goes on to call it an installment plan World War III, right? There's not a spectacular as in when the wind blows world civilization ending nuclear exchange, but there's a whole bunch of smaller conflicts, right? Proxy wars between various powers that we don't really get a sense
Yeah, a
of.
brief like Iran-Iraq nuclear conflict, I believe.
Very,
Um,
very
and this
briefly.
is actually written from the perspective of Ben Cole, from the perspective of Lauren's husband, who is much older than she is. We had our problematic age gap jokes in the first one. We'll leave them there. Um,
Yeah, no, they're good for each other.
yeah, they're doing their fucking best.
Mhm.
Ben Cole is a doctor. He's a good man, who has a pretty good analysis and says basically openly, "Yo, I know it's bad now in the United States. The United States did this to other countries when I was young." He
Mhm.
in when this is written, 93, there's a pretty like self-conscious like Eastern Europe, Latin America like thing going on there. I mean, this is just after we just did like economic shock therapy to all of Eastern Europe. Um,
Yeah, dismantling their welfare state, forcing people back into a predatory market.
yes.
Um, like it's in that and all that sort of shock therapy and the complete dismantling of such a social safety net has existed, boomerangs back here. Now you have homelessness in the tens of millions. Now you have people walking along highways looking for work. There is still infrastructure. There is still mass communication. The internet exists. The nets, as they call it. But a lot of it is a luxury. There hasn't been so much a regression of technology as there's been a contraction.
Yes. And it's worth noting in the first book, he's kind of a looming figure in the background, but you have President Donner, basically this kind of Democrat coded, but president that's just privatizing everything. Um, and he's kind of this like, weak liberal. They barely get him noted. I believe we joked that he was woke, because of course we did, because of woke. We don't have a space program, of course. Um, in this book, though, succeeding him, we have this figure that never really shows up. Like our characters aren't interacting with him. He's far away. But we have Andrew Steele Jarrett. Um,
Fantastic name.
Yes, he is, and he is, part of Christian America, this denomination that's this hyper religious, hyper conservative Christian nationalist denomination. And, if President Donner was Bill Clinton, doing quiet privatization and making people feel good about it and giving good explanations for it, Andrew Steele Jarrett is this looming specter of the return of Reaganism and like the sort of George W. Bush administration that was staring down, Bush II, staring down everybody in the late 90s as the Republicans, got on some crazy shit as they always like to do. It is the specter, and it is the specter even further than that. It's the specter of fascism. It is a fully, in a way that, no one has been able to really fully pull off in the United States. He has able to really fully, because the systems are so degraded, because the Democrats have sold off everything, because there is nothing left but corporate power. And the only institutions left are these like powerful religious institutions that are allied with capital to install new social norms. You are able to install a fully fascist regime in the United States.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's real interesting. Again, we talk about how prescient this seems nowadays, even down to the personalities at play here. Uh, His opponent, Jarrett's opponent, Vice President Edward J. Smith calls him a demagogue, a rabble-rouser, and a hypocrite. Smith is right, of course, but Smith is such a tired, gray shadow of a man. Jarrett, on the other hand, is a big, handsome, black-haired man with deep, clear blue eyes that seduce people and hold them. He has a voice that's a whole body experience, the way my father's was, and you can see where this is going, right? Of course, Trump rambles, he does not preach. But you can see right here the Kennedy versus Nixon on TV sort of parallel, right? This presence that's much more imposing and much more charismatic than a walking corpse like, say, Biden, right?
Yeah, and you have literally, this speech where he says, "Join us. Our doors are open to every nationality, every race. Leave your sinful past behind and become one of us. Help us to make America great again."
And the voice is no accident, of course. He is a fellow Texan.
Yes, he is a Texan described with a Texan type voice, and he's one of these guys that he knows how to back away from openly embracing his most like radical fascist forces that are literally burning people as witches, but he doesn't properly condemn them. He does the sort of thing he does what Trump did after like Charleston, things that like
Mm,
that. He kind of plays the, well, a lot's going on, and he obfuscates and obviously is supporting this even more like materially than we've like seen out of like one
very
like
fun.
Trump. This
Yeah,
is
yeah, and
further degraded society than we see today.
exactly, exactly. Jarrett has much more of a plan than Trump does. There's nothing of the useful idiot about him.
No, he is ideological in a way that it's worth noting. Like, when we talk about like Trump, and I'm speaking in 2025, our current context. Trump is very much like a right wing ideologue, but of like a kind of older type. Like he's kind of looking at like American capitalism, like pre New Deal, pre civil rights movement. That's more his model. Um, Jarrett and this thing is a very, and this is a kind of thing that there are forces like this in the Trump movement that, let's be real, has a very specific Christian nationalist fascistic vision. Jarrett is an ideologue. He is committed to this vision of Christian America
Yeah,
in a
this is
way
Rick
that sort of
Santorum with teeth.
yeah, yeah. The way that sort of like opportunistic right in America, currently isn't Trump's main thing. He'll use Christian nationalism, but his thing is fucking just gutting every program and dividing us up, in
Hmm.
a very like 20s type of way. That's a whole nother conversation, but there is daylight between them. Jared is a very different figure than Donald Trump.
100%.
He's
And
more
in the
similar to Bush, honestly.
Oh yeah, no, like Bush was much more open and I mean he was a true believer
Yes,
in the whole Clash of Civilizations crusade, sort of nonsense. I mean James Dobson prayed with him openly.
I will say they nailed the fucking 51st state Canada shit though.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing, right? We get our asses kicked
Yes, yes.
by
A warning
Canada
to
and
all.
Alaska, the Alcan War.
The Alcan War, which is a great name. Yeah, it's another thing that it's worth noting. Like the politics of this are fascinating because the grand political narratives are all kind of happening in the background, and the characters are feeling the waves from them. Right? The characters here are small compared to that. They are living in the waves of what's coming off of these grand political things. We are not with the people in the room where it happens, so to speak. We are so there is the Alcan War happening, where the United States, Canada and Alaska are able to grow a whole lot more stuff because of climate change. And so and there's refugees coming north. And so Canada and Alaska close their borders and say, actually, no, we're our own countries. And so the United States is at war with these people. You know, maybe that's a flash forward to our future. I hope not. Trump's right now, and as we speak, loves to throw out 51st state thing. If I'm going to give my prediction, it's
The
he doesn't,
First States starring Adam Sandler.
yeah, fucking awesome. But on a smaller level, we are with this community in Acorn. And it's this beautiful little community that's been around for 5 years. And we are getting them through Lauren's journals and occasional journal entries from other people, including Lauren's daughter, who seems to be kind of compiling all of these. She's giving commentary. In my version, it's in bold. Her words is kind of commentating on, this is why I chose this section. It's going to tell us about this. And you can tell from the beginning, Lauren's daughter is very resentful of her. We know from the beginning, Lauren obviously has great success with her religion she's created. We have that from the beginning. It says they'll make a god of her. And you have this daughter working through her feelings in the aftermath of everything that's happened. And every now and then we get something from Ban Cole or from Marcus, but most of this is Lauren's writings. And um, I think I'm gonna write a piece for the shelf on this, but I think Lauren is the like greatest fucking character in like all of fiction. She's so good. Like
Mhm.
this is Octavia is firing on all cylinders when she is writing this character.
Well, this is a person with remarkable, it's what did she say earlier? We're not born with purpose, we're born with potential. But she certainly has as close a thing to purpose as you can get. She has incredible clarity for what she wants to do with herself and for what she wants to forge her community into because she recognizes the necessity of it, right? She recognizes that the our leaders have abandoned us, that there is no meaningful federal institution holding everything together. Of course, there's a president in name who wields power, but people are almost totally disengaged, not completely, but almost totally disengaged from like Washington, right? So what happens when it seems that the American experiment has ended and there's more or less balkanization, right? You have to get a community of people together to step up, to become protagonists on the world stage and fend for themselves, right?
Mhm.
And basically reintegrate into this incipient network of more or less nominally independent communities. And to do
Yes.
that, you need a guiding philosophy that encourages people to act on their surroundings, to
And
shape themselves and God and the world.
And Earthseed is this idea that God has changed. There is no magic, there is no supernatural. All forces are material, and humans are part of nature, and everything is constantly changing. And you have the ability to intervene in the forces of history and make significant changes, and to yourself. Um, and
It's in,
so they think about that, and Lauren makes the argument in Earthseed, and it's connected to the name, that humanity needs a grand vision and that heaven is not real, but we can build a heaven for ourselves. She is saying that we need to take to the stars. We need to have an eventual vision. And the reason she argues for this isn't because of anything that's out in the stars, but because to go and colonize other worlds, to do that, the only way that can happen is with no profit motive. The only way that can happen is with no there is with great self-sacrifice, with great coordination, with great science and learning and technology to grow and expand humanity as a self-conscious project. And the only way to accomplish that is going to be to organize in a different type of way.
but
Honestly,
Jacob,
very Posadist in this kind of
Jacob,
thing.
we put a Tesla in orbit, Jacob.
Oh, we put a Tesla in orbit. True. That's the same thing. Yes.
Yeah.
But it's honestly like, obviously the Posadism is like a meme, but like the concept that aliens would have to not be capitalist anymore because if you have faster than light travel, there's no chance you have a profit driven society is objectively true. And Octavia Butler understands it in this book.
Yeah,
Um,
you do not leave this planet without solving inter-civilizational, intercultural conflict.
Elon Musk has said, he said yesterday, I think, that we're going to put a person on Mars in the next couple years.
Oh,
And,
please let
and
it be him.
Yeah, he said we're gonna have a robot called Optimus and shit. Like he's just fucking yapping. Like we're not even there. But I like this community when they meet up to each other, and it's like a community of mostly outcasts, former slaves, just people who like society didn't want, but they are willing to work together. They have mostly adopted this belief. So when they have community discussions and arguments, they're actually quoting from this book, right? There's this truck that they find, this really big advanced truck that
I
they find.
envisioned it as like an armored RV, basically.
Basically, yeah, because it's like says calls it a house truck. And like when they're discussing what to do with the truck, you have the guy, Travis Douglas, stand up and he says, Travis Douglas wanted to talk about expanding our community business, a subject dear to my own heart. He read, civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals. Civilization provides ways of combining the information, experience, and creativity of the many to achieve ongoing group adaptability. And then, any change may bear seeds of benefit. Seek them out. Any change may bear seeds of harm. Beware. God is infinitely malleable. God is change. Then he goes, we have an opportunity that we have to take advantage of, and then he gets into it. It's interesting the way this community is now operating. We have seen Lauren's kind of ideology has gotten into it, but her ideology is really one of you have to take control of history and make it happen. It's a very, it's not like a one-to-one like Marxist whatever, but like there is actually a lot of shades of materialism going on here. There are also shades of like, you know, Lauren is like God Emperor a little bit too. Like her own ego is not present here.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like they'll make a god of her, right? It's interesting to me, and we'll get into it a little bit more, of course, but coupled with the progression of humanity beyond this rocky period of this sort of last gasp of fascism, let's say, coupled with that, there is still this sort of shackling to previous modes of thought, of religion, of organization, right?
No doubt. But this community, is existing. They're doing their best. And the first major advancement in the plot, while they're saying that this election might happen, is we thought he was dead. We thought he was dead. And probably would have been better if he was. Um, we
Oh
meet,
no.
he's so bad. I fucking hate him so much. Marcus Duran. It is Lauren Olamina's younger brother that she thought died in the raid on her town. He is, he was a young teenager then. He's still not old, and he's described as incredibly beautiful, incredibly handsome, incredibly strong. And after that raid on, and she finds him, he is in slavery. He is a sex slave. She buys
Mm.
him, and he tells his story was basically after that he found a little community. He was like a pastor of a little community like their father was. It was cleared out by the cops. He ends up getting like enslaved basically just by like people nappers on
Yeah,
farm.
there are these slave collars now
Yes.
that are in pretty wide use.
Yes. And so she takes him in now, and he's a incredibly traumatized individual who one might hope would be, moderately thankful for his saving, but apparently not.
Well, and that's the thing, it's there but for the grace of God goes Lauren, right? Because
Sure.
they that's what separates the two of them is that Marcus doesn't have that guiding animating sort of purpose that Lauren does,
He
right?
needs one though, because it says both the children of that of the unnamed father, who's the pastor, are world shapers.
Hmm.
Like Marcus, it has the same set of talents as Lauren of speaking and thinking. And like, he has a more traditional view. He hangs on to his Baptist upbringing, but he has that same ability to convince and persuade. Um,
Exactly. And absent a absent an ability to create a new paradigm, a new sort of animating organizing force like Earthseed, right? He falls back on, you're absolutely right, the preaching of his father, the religion of his father, and he has resolved essentially never to be a slave again. And part and
mhm.
parcel of that is becoming an authority. And what structure allows that of him? Christian America.
The very same church that Andrew Steele Jarrett runs, and written by Larkin, Lauren's daughter, written after the fact about Mark, who she calls Uncle Mark, of course. He hated what talking about the collar and slavery, had done to him. And he needed to prove that he was not what it had forced him to become. No Christian minister could ever hate sin as much as Mark hated chaos. His gods were order, stability, safety, control. He was a man with a wound that would not heal until he could be certain that what had happened to him could not happen again to anyone ever. My father called my mother a zealot. I think that name applies even more to Uncle Mark. And yet, I think Uncle Mark was more of a realist. Uncle Mark wanted to make the earth a better place. Uncle Mark knew the stars could take care of themselves. Now, she has a bit of a biased perspective because, as we'll get into, she was not raised by him, but she knew him better than her mother. But Mark basically, after realizing the Earthseed people are Earthseed people, and like he tries to present to them, and he gets owned by facts and logic, he gets he loses the debate. He is Ken Ham debating Bill Nye at the Creation Museum.
Yeah, and like
Yeah,
Lauren, she
she sets
takes
him up for it.
well, and that's the thing. Like, I don't necessarily agree. She takes responsibility for this, right? She says, "I let him speak today because I wanted him to speak before he was truly ready." Right? You know, he knows the Bible backward and forward, but he doesn't really comprehend Earth seed, right? And so he can't really not create a sort of syncretism between the two, but he can't really bridge the gap rhetorically between them in a way that jives with everybody. You know, he's very adversarial. Um, and as far as I'm concerned, I think that's on him. I don't know that Lauren has any responsibility for this.
I think what I'll push. I feel you. This is also a deeply like traumatized individual we're talking about here that has not been like out of slavery for particularly long and
Hmm.
is not acting super rationally and like is trying to assert this thing that made him feel strong and comfortable. Um,
Right.
and Lauren is like aware of that, and she's also aware of his innate intelligence and his ability to convince. And she is like, he's just going to go for it because he's not quite in his right mind and he's going to look like an idiot. And if I let him study longer, he's not. So I'm going to let him do it now. So I'm not like, she doesn't, speak to them ahead of time and say, hey, make my dumbass brother feel stupid. But she makes this decision that ends up making him feel extremely small. And it is like a example of you totally understand why she does it. And it's not necessarily the wrong thing to do. She is trying
Right.
to
She's
keep a
trying to
community together,
yeah, she's trying to minimize the variables in doing so.
but she is not, she's able to be cynical in a certain type of way. There is a reason she is able to hold this community together. And it causes Marcus to leave, where he will go and become a pastor in Christian America. And let me see if I can find this particular quote from him because I think this is important. Marcus basically chooses Christian America because his church, his little outcast church, was destroyed by the police, right? The same way they were destroyed by raiders, the police destroy this one little church in the name of restoring order. And he basically realizes we don't just need God, we need state power. That's basically what we need power. We need institutions, we need people with guns. We need money. We need backers. And he's coming to conclusions that are not like entirely wrong in the sense of if you want to protect yourself in this world, you need some kind of teeth for it. Lauren knows
That
that.
is true, and that does come up.
But what is his solution is to back. I mean, it's the easiest. And he might say, well, whatever. He can come up with whatever reason. He picks the easiest horse to back because it's already there and it is an openly fascist institution.
It is a path of least resistance. No, you're
One that
absolutely right.
also tortures him because it doesn't get into it too much, but he is very clearly gay, or at least attracted to men, and he never marries. And Christian America is violently against gay men. So he is also a victim of Christian America and decides to make that trade off, and will end up becoming, over time, one of their most successful pastors. And what's interesting is he never becomes, put them all in camps type guy, but he doesn't have to be. He can spread the ideology and then make excuses when people go to camps of, oh, well, that's not the real whatever. There's some splinter group that,
Well, it's the same. It's the
yeah,
same as Jarrett, right? Making those little rhetorical sidesteps of the. Of course, there's the Crusaders, right? For example, that are essentially a fourth KKK, right?
yeah,
They're the sort of foot soldiers of Christian America that do all the witch burnings and all the pogroms and that sort of thing. And if you exist within that force that the Crusaders fight for, right? But you're not one of those put them all in camps people, right? What you can do then with your pulpit is, okay, well, I support everything that leads up to this like logical conclusion of people creating lynch mobs, right? But oh, I don't support their methods.
Right. So that's what's kind of looming over all this after he leaves. We have, in just some quick plot stuff, Lauren is pregnant with, of course, we know who will be Larkin. And Bancole, her husband, is arguing, we really need to leave. Acorn is not safe for us. I know I love what you're doing, but he's not really like bought in. He likes her vision, but he doesn't get it. He's tied to the to the ground, and he wants to find a safe community where they can live. But she, of course, rejects him, and they have their child, beautiful child, and she fully convinces him, we got to stay here. And you have this whole section where he's like, okay, we got to make this a home. And then, it's kind of this beautiful thing. They're going back and forth. And then he says, I helped you build this house, I said, referring to the literal meaning of his name, help me build a house. I helped you build this house. Now there's so much more work to do. And it's this kind of like, holy cow, we're now on the same page. We're gonna build together. And then immediately her next entry is they didn't shoot their way in. It seems that they don't intend to kill us yet. Since Dovetree, they have changed. Their leader has come to power. They have acquired, if not legitimacy, at least a shadow of sophistication. Roaring in, shooting everyone and burning everything is just perhaps too crude for them now. Or maybe it's just not as much fun. I write not knowing how long I'll be able to write. I write because they have not yet robbed us of everything. Our freedom is gone, our 2 trucks, our land, our business, our homes are gone, stolen from us. And it goes on and says, they will break us down, reshape us, teach us what it means to love their country and fear their God.
God,
And
this was so fucking heavy.
yeah,
Like they were getting off the ground. They were thriving. They were a growing community. They had a couple of trucks that they were doing business with, and then gone.
it's destroyed instantly.
There's a bit on page 62 in my edition here. Um, Nevertheless, young redwood trees, those only about a century old, not yet mature, are withering. A few miles to the north and south of us in the old national and state parks, the groves of ancient giants still stand. A few hundred acres of them here and there have been released by the government, sold to wealthy, usually foreign interests, and logged. And squatters have cut and burned a number of individual trees, as usual, to build shelters and feed cooking fires. But the majority of the protected ones, millennia old, resistant to disease, fire, and climate change, still stand. If people let them alone, they will go on childless, anachronistic, but still alive, reaching futilely skyward. And so there's already a sense, quite apart from Larkin's interjections, of course, ex post facto, quite apart from that, you already have the sense that, okay, what's going on here with Acorn is not going to last.
Right.
Right? There's going to be whatever it grows into is going to be either isolated or cut down, right? You can't look at these young redwoods dying and not think of like communities that make it a few generations, like Dovetree they mention, right? And then they get wiped up by disease or war, right?
Lauren is trying to build co-ops her way out of fascism. She is
Exactly.
she is
Exactly.
recreating, and it's not her fault because she doesn't have access to history, but she's recreating the attempts by like the utopian socialists of the early 19th century to basically show a better way to the people, and then they'll follow you without like a widespread like multi movement of people that are like interlocking and wide and have in working in their own interest. She kind
Which
of had this
is
idea they could grow an acorn, and it was a lovely idea, and
which
also
is
like
not to say
can't work.
that yeah, which is not to say that she didn't plan to get around to that.
Hmm.
But, you know,
It didn't happen though. It didn't
mm,
happen. These fascists, Jared's crusaders, they show up and they with these things called maggots, which are basically just tanks, like futuristic tanks. They rename Acorn Camp Christian, and they put laser wire around everything, and they put everybody in collars. And they're collars that basically, if you try and get them off, they cause you. I mean, it's just pain that shows no mark, and it does not actually kill you, but it like will just, your whole body feels on fire. Unclear exactly how it works, but yeah, completely shuts you down. And anything you try to do to stop them, it will shut you down. And these people basically they divide them up by men and women. They take the children, including Larkin, and they go and put them in quote unquote good Christian America homes. and they begin this re-education, and it's like some of the most harrowing shit I've read in a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, like they're starved, they're worked frequently to death, they're pitted against each other. There are people like even within the Earthseed community who turn each other in for this or that infraction. There's a couple of lesbians that get turned in because the Crusaders are of course homophobes. It's they do their best to to try and break down this community.
You have like a woman, like to describe how the collars work. You have a woman who jumps out the window to try and escape. She began to scream and scream and scream. And then somebody says, "No one's around," Allie said, still gasping. "She's just lying there on the ground, screaming and twisting. No one's even come out to see." She lay there all night. We couldn't help her. Her voice deteriorated from full throated screaming, the way any of us might scream in fear and pain, to hoarse, terrible grunting. She didn't pass out, or rather, she did, but she kept coming to again and making her terrible noises. And then it talks later. It says going to the door meant pain, going to the window meant pain. Even if you just didn't try to get out, just being there hurt bad. And of course, for the sharers among them, including Lauren, if they see someone in pain, they feel that pain. And this pain leads to the death of several people, including Bancole.
Justice for Bancole.
God.
I didn't expect to lose him.
Yeah, when I read this for the first time,
Just God damn it, you know? Like
yeah,
he's such a good guy. Like
yeah, he's a sweet guy. He had he just wants the best for his family. He was
mhm.
objectively right that they weren't safe. Um, they now if she had gone with him, she maybe would have never executed her vision, but she would have been
Well,
safe.
that's the thing, right? It's and of course the pox, right, has still not ended. They're still in the phase of rebuilding from the apocalypse. So the idea that they'll make a god of her at this stage is still a prediction, right? We don't really know where that's going to
Yeah,
go. And indeed, Larkin believes, she says herself, that, if Lauren had built Acorn but not Earthseed, she says, she would have been a wholly admirable person, right?
yeah.
And that's the thing, if because what Larkin sees in her mother is somebody who is a very able leader, orator, somebody who can forge a community, but it's Earthseed that drew the unwanted attention, right? It's Earthseed, the specter of Earthseed, that brought the Crusaders there too. And it's interesting how these forces and perspectives sort of clash because and I know that it's Earthseed that brought these people together in the first place, right?
It's and I mean to even try and mourn, they get electronically lashed. She's lashed into unconsciousness for trying to, she says, kill my bearded keeper with a pickaxe, and it would have been worth any amount of pain if I only could have succeeded. And in the same time, they're forced to dig the graves of their people who died. And she says here something notable: submission was no protection. If any of us were to survive, we must escape these people as quickly as possible. And I think that's super notable too. Like there is no way you can kind of submit. Like you sell out your fellow person, you might get an extra scrap of food, but like you're still in the fucking collars.
Yeah, and it jives with what she says earlier. Peace is dangerous because it encourages complacency and carelessness, which also kills sooner or later, right? The perception of peace under a political economy that demands endless growth, that demands this sort of submission, and basically whichever force that you've decided will protect you, that's fundamentally violent, will get you eventually.
And the whole thing is just, I mean, it's insufferable, just some of the descriptions. I mean, saying we do not struggle, our captors order us to kneel, to pray, to sing, to testify, and we do. I've made it clear to the others through my own behavior that we should obey. Why should anyone resist torture and death? What would be the good of that? We'll lie to these murderers, these kidnappers, these thieves, these slavers. We'll tell them anything they want to hear, do all they require us to do. Someday they'll get careless, or their equipment will malfunction, or they'll find or create some weakness, some blind spot, then we'll kill them. And they're torturing them, and it says they eat our food and feed us their leavings, either as bowls of obvious table scraps or boiled up in a watery soup with turnips and potatoes from our gardens. They live in our houses and sleep in our beds while we sleep on the floor of the school, men in one room, women in another. No communication between the two permitted. None of us is decently married, it seems. We were not married by a minister of the Church of Christian America. Therefore, we've been living in sin, fornicating like dogs. I heard one crusader say. That same crusader dragged Diamond Scott off to his cabin last week and raped her. She says he told her it was all right. He was a man of God and she should be honored. Afterward, she kept crying and throwing up. She says she'll kill herself if she's pregnant. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, yeah, and the whole time, right, her rapist is asking her to forgive him,
Yeah,
right?
that happens. Like, there's multiple different like rapes here from different characters, and it is, it doesn't linger on them, but it is a serious thing that happens at this
And it
camp.
doesn't need to, because it's so much worse in your head, right? I mean, eventually Lauren herself, after all the excruciating detail of people being worked to death and tortured, pretty much all that she devotes to herself is now I have been raped,
Hmm.
and that's it.
And she makes the point later on. My ancestors in this hemisphere were by law chattel slaves. In the US, they were chattel slaves for 2.5 centuries, at least 10 generations. I used to think I knew what that meant. Now I realize that I can't begin to imagine the many terrible things that it must have done to them. How did they survive it all and keep their humanity? Certainly, they were never intended to keep it, just as we weren't. And that regrounds it here because even though we're using, shock collars that are technically, slightly futuristic technology, even though we've got maggot trucks that are, technically not a real thing and special laser wire, this is this sexual assault in the name of God, this regime of Christian nationalism, this all of the shit they go through is real things that have been inflicted on real people inside the borders of our country. And this does it in a modern or slightly beyond modern context, but there is nothing here morally or politically that is not real. There's nothing speculative about anything done to the women and men in this book. And I love that Octavia Butler put that in to make the point that this was done for hundreds of years, chattel slavery in the United States, and also the point that they were not meant to keep their humanity. And God damn it, they still did. And that is so cool and impressive to me.
Oh yeah, and the other side of that, right, is that what is being done to them, right? The concentration camp that the Crusaders have set up, right? It's illegal. It's
Yeah.
illegal. She says it right here. It was never legal to collar non-criminals, never legal to confiscate their property or separate husband from wife, or to force either to work without pay of some kind. The matter of separating children from parents, however, might have been managed almost legally. And that's the thing, right? The law has never protected anyone in the history of humankind. Like what does protect people is the institutions and people that who believe in and interpret these laws, right? And that's the other thing, right? Not only has everything here happened in human history and in American history in particular, but it's happening right now. No,
Yeah.
it's literally happening right now, and it's concentration camps, detention centers for immigrants called overflow centers, right? It's anything that goes on in our prison systems that's done to felons, that's done to people who are classified as less than human, right? And there's all kinds of rhetorical flourishes that your newspapers of record, your politicians use to obfuscate and justify these things.
Today, March 16th, a video was published by the White House of Venezuelan migrants who were deported illegally to El Salvador, being incarcerated there, having their heads and beards shaved, being like mistreated by masked guards, like wearing like black masks and no like identifying badge numbers. At this foreign detention facility that we're paying them and saying they're going to be put to work for at least a year. That is a thing that we are openly doing. There is a judge in the United States who gave an order that that was not allowed. They did it anyway. The Secretary of State posted like a joke on Twitter about it and said, "Oops." That happened today. Now, I don't know where this goes, and I don't know when you're listening and what has happened since. And I hope to God that that's been reversed or something. But there's nothing here that's not that's hyperbolic.
Mhm.
Um, it's horrible, and Butler is making us look at it. but there's nothing about this that's hyperbolic. They burn their books and papers. This is a notable thing. They've burned all that they could of our past. It's all ungodly trash, they say. They made us do much of the fetching and carrying, the stacking and piling of so much that we loved. They watched us, their hands on their belts, all the books on paper and disc, all the collection that our younger kids had assembled of minerals and seeds, leaves, pictures, all the reports, models, sculptures, paintings that our older kids have done, all the music that Travis and Gray wrote, all the plays that Emery wrote, all the bits of my journal that they could find, all the legal papers, including marriage licenses, tax receipts, and Bacole's deed to the land. All these things our teachers threw lamp oil on and burned, then raked and stirred and burned again. So they're coming after culture. They're coming after, beautiful things that people make, actual art. And if that's ringing any bells, then good.
Well, and what are they trying to replace it with? They're trying to replace it with Gen AI slop. They're
Right.
trying to replace it with dream masks
Dream
in this.
masks. Talk about dream masks, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that there's a sort of iconoclasm with which Christian America operates, right? And I don't know if it's just what the kids are exposed to, but like there's not a lot of focus on films, there's not a lot of focus on television or other forms of culture, which is an interesting sort of divergence from the evangelical sphere in this country, right? They have a massive Christian media empire that we've talked about before on the show that exists more or less in parallel and like a twisted mirror of mainstream culture.
Yeah.
But here they don't really have that. They have dream masks, and they are basically you wear this like the virtual reality
Like
headset.
Oculus or something.
Yeah, yeah, it's an Oculus that like it's got a preloaded like movie or like fantasy like adventure that you can live out. You can just sit there and goon to it, and like it's all like Christian America fables. It's like real insipid like action uh morality plays and stuff.
Lenore, would
Um
you do a Left Behind dream mask?
oh my God, 100%. You kidding me?
Can you imagine? If you have power in like the Left Behind dream mask, like can you like fuck Nikolai Carpathia? Like is
I
that
want. I was gonna say I'm gonna be like Chick Nikolai Carpathia, Chickalai Carpathia.
Chick-fil-A? Let's fucking go. If we ever have to do another Left Behind episode, that's the title right there.
Yeah, yeah, I will be the transgender antichrist. You kidding me?
The trans. If they made it Left Behind today, they would have focused more on the transgenders. I think that would have
Oh
been.
wait, well, wait a minute. But aren't they? Isn't there like remastered versions of the Left Behind books that are like updated with different rhetoric depending on what people are getting like worked up over?
Yeah, but I don't think it's like that updated. It's more like it's more simple, and I don't think it's been done in a while.
I want transphobe edition Left Behind. Show me the fucking.
Oh, don't worry. There's transphobia in Left Behind. I just don't think it gets as much attention as it would get today. Nikolai Carpathia coming out and saying like we want to give trans surgeries to migrants in our country. We want to. I don't even know what this voice is. I don't know why that Nikolai Carpathia
All
talks like
children
JD
will be
Vance.
force femmed, like fucking like.
Yeah, he comes out and is yeah. We will be mandatory critical race theory.
But no, no, what they have here is we see the Dream Masks in particular from the perspective of Larkin. She grows up with this black woman action hero called Asha Veer.
hmm
And
Which is also the name she is given.
yeah, yeah, it's interesting to me that like even in this white supremacist sort of paradigm, they find this way to incorporate. I mean, it's similar to my mind how like women are treated in fascist literature, like fucking Ben Shapiro, like True Allegiance, right?
Yeah.
There are these people who we are led to believe can in fact, despite the racism, despite the prejudices, despite the sexism, find this way, find this niche in this paradigm in service of the greater, like, I mean, we're led to believe that like ultimately like above Asha Veer there's like white men pulling the strings, but like
Right.
she still has this role to play.
It's like it reminds me of like if you have you seen Run Hide Fight?
No, I'm not familiar.
It's a Daily Wire movie about a girl whose dad is a Marine and he taught her to shoot. And there's a school shooting, and it's like a power fantasy movie about this teenage girl killing school shooters who are like, for some reason, driven by Marxist ideology. It's a little complicated. A Marine ends up showing up and like killing multiple students. You have And you have a scene at the end where the girl stands over the school shooter. He's been completely disarmed. She flashes back to her father putting a buck out of its misery, and she fucking shoots him in the head. It's it's
Wait,
harrowing.
was this before or after Hannah?
I don't know what Hannah is, so
It's what the fuck is that movie? I don't remember the actress, but like it's this girl who's like got superpowers or whatever. She's genetically engineered to be like superpowered. And at the end, like there's a shooting there's a putting a deer out of its misery, like visual metaphor throughout. And she does that to her tormentor, like at the end of that. Did
no
they,
idea, but it's very likely that it's the latter because these things are not original. Neither is Ash Severe probably in this universe. But
oh
it's like
yeah.
worth noting that they have this slop, right? They have this evangelical slop that is like, mass produced and lazy and derivative.
And even
And
like
it feels very modern.
yeah, and even it speaks to the ideological narrowness, the ideological dead end, the mind prison of this whole thing.
Yeah.
That like even the rebellious shit, right? Even the dirty stuff that Larkin finds when she's younger, right? A deliberately mislabeled dream mask. The label said the story of Moses. In fact, it was the story of a girl who had wild sex with her pastor, the deacons, and anyone else she could seduce. I was 11 years old when I discovered that mask. And it's like even the fantasies are about submission to authority figures, right? And still tied up in the idea of young girl as seductress, which is the
Right.
sort of thing that, every young man's battle fucking operates on.
And a lot of also mainstream pornography in real life too. There's a lot of that, those sort of like things that get reinforced.
Step Deacon, what are you doing?
Step Deacon. Is that the name of the episode? God, I hope not.
No, no,
This
no,
is
no.
way too harrowing of an episode to have a name like that.
Yeah.
But while that's happening to Asha, of course, her mother is still in camp. She spends like a year and a half in this camp. At one point, Lauren reflects, how many people, I wonder, can be pinned up and tormented, re-educated before it begins to matter to the majority of Americans? How does this pinning people up look to other countries? Do they know? Would they care?
It's still astonishing to me. Like they mentioned that like there's still lots of immigration from Latin America north. It's still astonishing to me that like the degeneration totally of the US state, like there is still people coming here for a better shot.
Presumably, that's just unlivable because of climate change. That's kind of how I'm reading it. It's not like it's like that's just like Latin
Just
America's.
literally go north. Like that's how you
Yeah.
survive.
I think it's like the reverse of the road. They're going south because everything's frozen. I think people are just going north because remember the descriptions of Southern California, like how
Oh
fucking
yeah.
bad it was. I think just the closer you are to the equator, it's probably just unlivable. That's kind of what I'm reading into
I
this.
think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But or who knows? Maybe the United States in like its waning days fucking nuked Venezuela. I don't know.
I mean, it's certainly like we fight fucking Canada and Alaska to a standstill. Certainly geopolitically, we're a hell of a lot. We're not the military hegemon that we are. It's the
Uh,
one
yeah. It describe. Let me read a little bit about the war actually to
totally.
give that context before you give that analysis here. Described after the fact by Larkin. There was much slaughter on both sides of the Canadian border, and there was air and naval attacks on the coastal cities of Alaska. The war was like an exaggeration of the attempted breakout at Camp Christian, which is a breakout at Camp Christian that fails, just people attacking and losing. Much blood was shed, but little was accomplished. The war began in anger, bitterness, and envy at nations who appeared to be on their way up, just as our country seemed to be on a downward slide. Then the war just petered out. At first, there was much fighting, much destruction, much screaming and flag waving. Then, gradually, over 2034, a terrible, bitter weariness seemed to creep over people. Poor families saw their sons drafted and killed as they said, for nothing. It was harder than ever to buy decent food. Much of our grain over the past few years of climate change and chaos had been imported from Canada, after all. In the end, in late 2034, peace talks began. After that, except for a lot of hard feelings and occasional nasty incidents, the war was over. The border between Canada and America stayed where it had been, and Alaska remained an independent country. It was the first state to officially, completely, successfully secede from the Union. People were saying Jared's home state of Texas would be next.
That's never gonna fucking happen.
No, especially not in this world. Texas has to be at least as unlivable as Southern California.
hmm
Um, in this climate hell that they're living in, unless there's something I don't know about. What? Lenore, I've never been to Texas. What is Texas's plan for climate change? What are y'all gonna do to survive?
Texas's plan for climate change is to Basically just continue privatizing their power grid and just selling contracts back and forth while it all burns.
That ought to do it. That ought to fix things. I'm imagining giant bubbles, like giant climate controlled bubbles. So I would recommend if any of our listeners are engineers, get on that. And I
It's
get like 5%.
it's so disappointing because Texas has enormous potential for, like, if there were a socialist government in control of the United States right now, imagine the solar that could come out of Texas. Imagine the wind that could come out of Texas, right? It's fucking huge.
I'll tell you what's fucking huge is your woke ideology. Now, what were you gonna say about the war?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, Canada lights up Seattle at one point.
Hmm.
Um,
Good on them.
that Larkin's connection, of course, is that her adoptive sister is killed in this attack on Seattle by a Canadian missile. Um,
And yeah, she lives under the shadow of that her whole life because
yeah,
this biological child was supposedly perfect.
yeah, yeah, and it's where you see, right, the limits of the idea that, well, her parents are, Christian America, they're good Christian America supporters, and they never blame Jarrett, that good man, that fine man, that man of God, for getting him into this war that killed their kid, right? That shows you the limits of just waiting around for people to have enough remorse to know, like, where their source of suffering is, right? People have philosophies, people have frames of reference, people have material conditions that inform their decisions, and if you don't contend with those, if you wait for millions of people who voted one way to make the right choice, you're just going to wait forever, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's an excuse people to tell themselves instead of talking to their neighbors. And of course,
Right.
there are true believers that cannot be swayed and should be, corralled and like and organized against and repressed. But, like, that's the thing. There are people that you can talk to, but they have to be pulled out of their rhetorical holes.
I will also note that it's just a thing that I'm bummed out by is that in this world, the principled anti-imperialist position would, of course, to be pro-Canada. And the idea of having to wave a fucking maple leaf flag at a protest is so depressing to me. I'm sorry. It doesn't hit the same way as a Palestine flag. It just doesn't. I don't want to wave a
You don't
maple
have
leaf.
a portrait of, like, cyborg Doug Ford from the future on your wall.
Fucking like Justin Trudeau, like holding up Justin Trudeau. He's like still alive. He's like their God King. He came back. Yeah, not doing that. I'll protest the war. I'll be caught dead before you see me holding up the maple leaf. Um,
Alaska's got the fucking Big Dipper. That's pretty cool.
no, yeah, Alaska. We'll see how Alaska did. I'll tell you what. Who else was caught dead was the fucking guards at Christian America. Get fucking wrecked.
Thank Christ.
Because after a year and a half or so, they, being dumbasses, put their control unit in a cabin, Lauren's cabin, and the fucking there's a landslide. There's a climatic disaster. Interestingly enough, a change in the conditions falls on it, deactivates their collars. The people rise up and they fucking just knife them all to death. And it's
Mhm.
very, it's I mean, it's what we all wanted to happen. If they had like written another 30 pages just describing this, it wouldn't have been enough. It is very satisfying and necessary, and it actually doesn't linger on the violence against their oppressors for very long. But like it is completely, earned and understood, and then the
Let's
terror afterwards.
let's go through it a little bit. Let's
Yeah.
get some catharsis on this subject here. Some of our teachers came rushing out of their cabins to see what was wrong, and they were torn to pieces by the people they had so enjoyed tormenting. Some of the captives, desperate to escape while they could, tried to find their way through the laser wire in the dark, and the wire cut their flesh to the bone when they ran into it. Earthseed made no such lethal mistake. We went into the cabins to arm ourselves, to rid ourselves of our teachers, and to cut off our damned collars. My group piled onto onto the two teachers who were there out of bed, one with his pants and shirt on, and one in long underwear. They could have shot us, but they were so used to depending on their belts to protect them that it was the belts they tried to reach. One stood and said, "What's going on?" The other lunged at Natividad and me with a wordless shout. We grappled with them, dragged them down, and strangled them. That simple. Even simple for me. It hurt when they hit me, it hurt when I hit them, and it didn't matter a good goddamn. Once I had my hands on one of them, I just shut my eyes and did it. I never felt their deaths, and I have never been so eager and so glad to kill people. We couldn't see them very well anyway in the dark cabin, but we made sure they were dead. We didn't let go of them until they were very, very dead. Our makeshift knives were still in the walls and floor of our barracks, but our hands did the job. And then we had guns. We used a chair, then a night table to smash open a gun cabinet. More important, then we had wire cutters, and then there's a great bit about them lining up and cutting off all their collars.
And yet they were moderate.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly,
it's
exactly.
very this moment. It's very much this moment of, there is this outpouring of um
Yeah, you know, CL,
violence.
CLR James from fucking Black Jacobins, as you very correctly bring up, there is a difference between brutality in the name of reproducing a paradigm of brutality. There's a difference between that and between the people so brutalized rising up and engaging in what he said, as James puts it, passions momentarily passions quickly stated.
And then afterwards it says, we burned Acorn. No, no. We burned Camp Christian. We burned Camp Christian so it couldn't be used as Camp Christian anymore. If Christian America still wants the land it stole from us, it will have some serious rebuilding to do. We spread lamp oil and diesel fuel inside the cabins that we built from the trees we cut and the stone and concrete we hauled. We spread oil in the school Grace and Mora had designed and we all had worked so hard to build and make beautiful. We spread it on the bodies of our teachers. All that we could not take with us, all that the other inmates had not taken or destroyed, we burned. The buildings might not burn to the ground because of the rain that had soaked everything, but they would be gutted and unsafe. The furniture that we had built or salvaged would burn. The hated flesh would burn. So once more, we watched our homes burn. We went into the hills, separating from the last of the other inmates who went their own ways to the highway or wherever else they might want to go. From the hills for a time, we watched. Most of us had seen our homes burn before, but we had not been the ones to set the fires. This time, though, it's too late for fire to be the destroyer that we remembered. The things that we had created and loved had already been destroyed. This time, the fires only cleanse.
God damn.
Fucking goat. She's the goat. I'm telling you.
Hmm. Hmm.
She's the best.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's it's part and parcel of this philosophy that she has, is that in the course of change, there comes a point where something can't change back, right? And you have to be prepared to move on from it and build something else.
So they do move on. They have to split up. The Earth Seed left folks left alive. And
The
at this
King of
point,
Salem tells them that big towns are good.
yeah. um and at this point they basically slum it. She looks for Larkin, but of course she is ultimately going to fail. She finds Mark, and that's really harrowing and horrible because Mark is teaching and he just absolutely refuses to believe that anything that she said happened.
Well, and
And
not only that, like he does acknowledge that there are crusaders who are doing the very thing that she
yeah,
describes. And he's like, well, they're a splinter group. Jared disclaims, any sort of connection with them, and like he knows he's fucking lying.
yeah, and has to flee from it. And it is yeah, and this is happening while we have Larkin's journals talking about growing up in a Christian America family where she like found a doll one time and was forced to burn it and put her hands on the like ashes of it and being told, well, if you think that hurts, just wait till you go to hell.
Yeah.
And she says something here that I think is maybe the most apt thing written in this book for our modern era, even more than the like fascist gangs and stuff. God, hopefully we don't get quite to this level, but we have gotten to the level of what I'm about to read. The purpose of Christian America was to make America the great Christian country that it was supposed to be, to prepare it for a future of strength, stability, and world leadership, and to prepare for its people for life everlasting in heaven. Yet sometimes now, when I think about Christian America and all that it did when it held power over so many lives, I don't think about order and stability or greatness or even places like Camp Christian or Pelican Bay. I think about the other extremes, the many small, sad, silly extremes that made up so much of Christian America life. I think about a little girl's doll, and I try to banish the shadows of panic that I still can't help feeling when I see one. This is, the panic over, this is driving yourself neurotic over like, black women in video games. This is losing your mind over a supposed DEI conspiracy. This is people panicking about drag queen story hours that may or may not exist. This is
Mm.
transvestigating, every person you come across in your life. This is the belief that there are Antifa thugs around every single corner. And these things impart on people in a very specific and terrifying way, including their victims, like Larkin, who can't see a doll for the rest of her life without being scared.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're marked, you're marked by the insanity and the uncaring, unchanging, fear and hatred of somebody who sees you chewing on a doll, right? And takes that as you desecrating an image of white womanhood and burns you, right? And then for the rest of your life, like it's you that has the I don't want to call it insanity, right? But it's you're twisted beyond this. You're instilled with this irrational fear because of, something that's even more fucking irrational, right?
And so what ends up happening is Lauren basically ends up recruiting some followers. She goes on the road. She has a period where she basically starts being a missionary. She starts being like, "Can I help you out at your house?" She does the Jesus thing of like walking up to fishermen and stuff. Of like just helping out with something or just like calling something out and just doing her best and seeing who she can get to work with her. She has one woman that like wants to fuck her, which is pretty funny, but does end up converting, ends up making her way up to what is it, Portland?
Yeah, Portland or Salem, one of the two.
Yeah, and making it up to the Northeast and basically just winning people over and saying everybody has something that they need. Even the wealthy people that she's able to kind of get as patrons, they have something that they need in their life. And she is able to unite people around her as this like central figure, sell people on Earthseed, and then she publishes the books online and it basically goes viral, which proves something that I've been saying from the very beginning. Lauren Olamina is a poster.
Yes. The
She's the best
posters will
poster of all
save
time.
us.
She posts her way to liberation. I mean, come on.
Never stop posting.
Never stop posting. You might just start a new religion that's also sort of socialist. Kind of. It's not capitalist. It's something. I don't know. It's Earthseed. It's something new for sure. In fact, they end up building like Earthseed dual power. Like not exactly, but it says like, Earthseed's a wealthy sect that welcomed everyone and made use of everyone. It owned land, schools, farm, factories, stores, banks, several towns, and it owned a lot of well-known people, lawyers, physicians, journalists, scientists, politicians, and even members of Congress, and they all hope to fly off to Alpha Centauri.
Hmm.
That's not a proper description of dual power, but I thought it was a funny joke.
I do like she's talking to Len at this point, the woman who's attracted to her at first, and she makes the point, you need to do what Jarrett does. What? I demanded, not wanting to do anything Jarrett did. Focus on what people want and tell them how your system will help them get it. Tell folksy stories that illustrate your points and promise the moon and stars, literally, in your case. Why should people want to go to the stars anyway? It'll cost a lot of money and time, it'll force us to create whole new technologies, and I doubt that anyone who's alive when the effort starts will live to see the end of it. Some scientists might like it. It'll give them the chance to work on their pet projects. And some people might think it's a great adventure, but no one's going to want to pay for it, right? And it's very in not in the sense of telling folksy stories and promising the moon and stars, right? But I couldn't help reading this and thinking of socialist reconstruction, right?
Yeah.
The book that is intended to, we can't predict what a socialist country will look like or how we get to building socialism, but part of reestablishing the continuity between previous movements and today, part of reestablishing the plausibility of socialism in the public consciousness is telling them, okay, this is what it might look like, right?
Hmm.
And as Len goes on to say, did people join Acorn for Earthseed or in the hope of feeding their kids? And that's the thing. You have to, as Parenti put it, right? The revolution that feeds the kids has your support.
Hmm. 100%. And we don't get to see a lot of the growth. We have a big at this point. It's very clear Lauren's on the upswing, and then we have a very large jump in time. In this time, Jarrett falls out of favor after losing the Alcan War. It is exposed that he, very much as we kind of knew from the beginning, was definitely involved in burning people, definitely involved with the fascists.
Oh yeah.
Um, we also get a little more of Larkin's story. Larkin, this Christian home she was raised in, is horrible, abusive. She's getting sexually abused. She leaves the household. and ends up Uncle Mark turns out the whole time he knew where she was. He was lying, and she ends up living with him. He lies to her, says your mother's dead. And yeah, they like for decades she thinks that's the case. And even after everything comes out about Jarrett, it says Uncle Mark researched this himself several years ago, and he says it's true that about, Jarrett being a murderer. True and sad and wrong, and in the end, irrelevant. He says Jarrett's teachings were right, even if the man himself did wrong. So Mark remains very committed to this sort of like fascist vision. And while they lose state power, it remains a, relevant enough church to make him a very wealthy man and a very famous pastor. So yeah, he's, I don't know, Eli from Righteous Gemstones now. I don't know what he is. I don't know his preaching style, but that's what's going on the other end of things right now. It's pretty dark, and I mean, eventually Larkin realizes that she looks a hell of a lot like this famous woman that runs
Hmm.
Earthseed. Ends up linking up with Lauren, going to talk to her, and yeah, I mean, they have this reunion, and like Larkin is just really not able to kind of come to terms with Lauren on anything. She doesn't see the vision. She doesn't agree with Earthseed. She loves Uncle Mark, and there's no proper reconciliation
Yeah,
between.
to her, Earthseed was her mother's favorite child.
Yeah,
You know, and we can't blame Lauren entirely for not finding her daughter because, Mark was the critical link between them two, right? Mark knew where Larkin was before Lauren did, and he chose to keep Larkin from her.
yeah. It says they meet each other, and it says she was somewhere in her 50s, 58, I remembered from my reading. She was born way back in 2009, before the pox. My God, she was old, but she didn't look old, even though her black hair was streaked with gray. She looked big and strong, and in spite of her pleasant, welcoming expression, just a little frightening. She was a little taller than me and maybe a little more angular. She looked not hard, but as though she could be hard with just the smallest change of expression. She looked like someone I wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of, and yes, even I could see it. She looked just like me. And Lauren asks if she's got certain birthmarks and moles, and she immediately tells her to sit down, and they spend some time together. But like, Lauren's, and it may be fairly so, but has this just very angry reaction towards Mark. It's one of the first emotions she ever sees her mother express is this rage towards this man that took care of her. And that kind of, they're just never able to really have a proper relationship, despite everything that Lauren has built. And at the end, Lauren said, I can never forgive Mark. He has stolen my daughter so thoroughly from me.
Hmm.
And that's like not a thing that's rectified. That's just like
No.
that's what fucking happened. And this book is really, in universe, kind of Larkin getting to know her mother in a way that she didn't while her mother was alive, because her mother is dead at the point of, collecting all this, presumably.
Hmm.
Um,
And
and
acknowledging, I
yeah,
think, that in the course of embracing change, and in the course of navigating it, right? There are some things that you cannot change.
yeah,
And so how do you flow around it, right? How do you incorporate that into your worldview? And there are things, it's not every part of you is as adaptable as you would like it to be, right? We talked about Lauren perhaps setting Mark up to fail early on and the effect that that had because of her conviction, right? Um, Larkin has something similar, right? She hadn't found me, Lauren hadn't, and Uncle Mark had. I wondered just how hard she'd really looked. And even with access to all the information about how her relationship with Mark ended up keeping her from Lauren, the fact remains Mark was a stabilizing force early on. Mark was a relative and a mentor to her in a way that Lauren could not be. And however toxic the institution that produced him, it still served this purpose at the time.
and then we have this last journal from Lauren where she says, in 2090, the ships are taking off. I know what I've done. I have not given them heaven, but I've helped them to give themselves the heavens. I can't give them individual immortality, but I've helped them to give our species its only chance at immortality. I've helped them to get to the next stage of growth. They're young adults now, leaving the nests. It will be rough on them out there. It's always rough on the young when they leave the protection of the mother. It'll take a toll, perhaps a heavy one. I don't like to think about that, but I know it's true. Out there, though, among the stars, on the living worlds we already know about, and on other worlds that we haven't yet dreamed of, some will survive and change and thrive, and some will suffer and die. Earthseed was always true. I've made it real, given it substance. Not that I ever had a choice in the matter. If you want a thing, truly want it so badly that you need it as you need air to breathe, that unless you die, you will have it. Why not? It has you. There is no escape. What a cruel and terrible thing escape would be if escape were possible. And then it describes, her watching the departure with the last of the living members of Acorn and their children. Some of them were on the ship, and then finally, now I watch as one by one the ships lift their cargoes from the earth. I feel alone with my thoughts until I reach out to hug each of my friends and looked into their loved faces. This one solemn, that one joyous, all of them wet with tears. Except for Harry, they'll all go soon in these same shuttles. Perhaps Harry's ashes and mine will keep company someday. The destiny of Earthseed is to take root among the stars, after all, and not to be filled with preservative poisons boxed up at great expense, as is the revived fashion now, and buried uselessly in some cemetery. I know what I've done. And then it just has the parable of the talents from the Bible.
Hmm.
And that's it. She says, I know what I've done. You
The
know?
parable of the talents, of course, being there's three servants and they each get a different amount of money, and two of them go out and invest it, and they multiply their investment, and then there's one that gets like one coin and he buries it so as not to lose it, right? He's behind, so he minimizes risk, and he's the one that the master is like, okay, you're a fuck up.
Yeah. He's mad at him.
Hmm.
Well, I'm curious, Lenore. The end of this book speaks for itself and kind of the profundity of it. She doesn't have everything, but she has built this thing. But what do you think the tie-in is with this story, Parable of the Talents?
I mean, Mark has this incredible, talent, haha, quote unquote. Um, Mark has this incredible talent and he buries it, not in the sense of going into obscurity, right? But in the sense of falling back on what he knows, even if what he knows has been subsumed into this repressive, regressive, the text directly describes his faith as unchanging at one point, right? Paradigm. And where does it get him? It gets him influence and wealth and power within this time period, but he doesn't move on. He doesn't get his family back, and he certainly doesn't. Presumably he doesn't go on one of these ships.
He
And that's
lives
a
his life alone as a very clearly gay man that cannot be with someone because of the constraints of his beliefs as well. We don't get a lot in Mark's head, but we know that's going on.
no, exactly,
So there's that
exactly.
emotional toll as well.
Yeah, and I don't want to suggest that there's a perfect like one-to-one mapping of this servant is that character, that servant is that character, but
No.
I mean that's the point, right? Is that Lauren does something with what she has been given. It's not even a gift, but it is a responsibility, right? The ability to feel others' pain is I mean she herself describes it as not not a blessing at all, and she can suppress it, she can run from it, or she can do what we see here in the text, which is allow herself to be guided by a profound feeling of love, as I believe Che Guevara put it, right? She goes in a revolutionary direction whereby she won't be able to see it in her lifetime, but she will create a world that has transcended the pain that this one exists with now. And hey, perhaps that means sacrificing the search for her daughter along the way. Perhaps Larkin is right that okay, like there's this rift between them because Lauren didn't do everything in her power to bridge it. But what has she accomplished now that the world that humanity has returned to the stars? Right? There's so much more. There's so much more that she's been able to reap, that humanity has been able to reap with her unflinching conviction in the sowing.
Good ass book. And though the series was not able to be finished, the story of Lauren Olamina is able to be, at least in her own lifetime, finished. I don't feel like this story is like a cliffhanger, which thank
No.
God, because I would be going crazy if there it was. Like the end of Parable. If it had ended at Parable of the Sower, I would have been like, oh my God, what happens next, right? Parable of Talents wraps up in a type of way that is very clean, and I can see where she was potentially going with the next one, or maybe I couldn't even guess. I don't know.
Mm,
But I do think it's a very beautiful ending, despite the fact that it is a, unfinished trilogy. And, we can only kind of guess where the next one would have exactly looked. We know space has something to do with it, and
yeah.
Trickster has something to do with it. Yeah, no, this is a beautiful, beautiful book. People should read this duology. There's, even if you've listened to this, there's nothing we can do to really properly spoil these books. You should read them. I'm very, very skeptical about this movie that's coming out not too long
Oh
from
God. Wait, who's
now.
behind it?
I know it's being distributed by A24, but like, I don't know who's like directing it. I know like they've got a cast and stuff. I don't know much about it. We should probably see a trailer for it this year. I don't know. I'm worried they're gonna like do like a weird Trump metaphor or any number of things like in a way that doesn't quite work.
They're gonna
But
do a Wonder Woman 1984 with it.
sure, sure, sure. But or just, that one story from George Saunders. But honestly, like, yeah, these two books are so powerful, and Octavia Butler is incredibly goated, as I said, and I and know this episode's been light on the jokes, but there's just so much to take away from this. But
And so many
yeah,
parallels, right, with what we're seeing now. Of course, we're not living under the open terroristic dictatorship that many within the Trump administration would like. But, there's plenty of things that could happen. There's plenty of roads that we could go down without sufficient resistance, without sufficient organization that are a hell of a lot worse than the other ones. It's
yeah,
interesting to me that the we know so much more about what happens to Christian America and Jarrett's whole thing. We know so much more about that than the process of building Earthseed, right? Because what happens to Christian America and Jarrett, right? They lose the election after they lose the war. They're not able to like entrench themselves politically forever. Christian America gets bogged down in all kinds of lawsuits because all sorts of horrific crimes against humanity are exposed. So, there is still the institutions in terms of law, in terms of media, doing work. Despite how woefully unprepared they are for Jarrett's rise in the first place, right? The shit catches up to them. Jarrett drinks himself to death. CA goes, not necessarily bankrupt, but is a lot less. They degenerate beyond the point of influence that they had, and that's the thing, right? These fascist projects aren't sustainable. They do
no,
degrade into infighting and self cannibalization eventually, but there is still a counterforce that has to be built against them. And I find it interesting that we are told that it rises, and we see the result of it outlasting this Jarrettist project, but the process thereof is more or less in the background. It's more or less left to us it's left to us to do, right?
yeah. Reject Jared thought, embrace Marxism, Leninism, Olaminism. I think is what we have to take away from this. Like I said, this has been an episode that's been pretty light on jokes, but I have one more pretty serious thing to bring up. We do have a guest. He was really late. I apologize, but it's in the interest of closing this out on a very serious note. We should let our guest at least like share his thoughts and feelings on Parable of the Talents.
Yes, yes. Welcome, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Of course, not to be outdone by last week's guest. We, in the interest of balance, we thought we'd bring him on to discuss a little bit of this book.
Yeah, we're
Miss,
enlightened centrists on the socialist shelf in that
yeah.
regard.
So, Mr. President, welcome. Thank you, Lenore, Jacob. Octavia Butler is an institution in the country of Ukraine in our science fiction scene, and I'm excited to return for the next episode. There will be, of course, a sub-series on this remarkable woman. So thank you for. I apologize for my lateness. There's a lot going on right now.
President Zelensky, I'm kind of concerned because you have not actually said thank you for being on this show. No. God. Yeah, had to end it with something there, folks. Really appreciate y'all listening. Next week, if you've listened this far, next week you absolutely should tune in because we're talking Moby Dick. So be ready for Moby Dick because
Boy, oh boy.
boy oh boy,
This is
it's
a
gonna
big one.
be, dare I say, a whale of an episode.
Nah.
uh appreciate y'all for listening. God has changed. See y'all next week.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.